All right.
All right, let's shake it up that. Oh, I gotta explain that, sorry. So before we get started, I'm gonna explain what I just started to do because I just came from a workshop and I'm in my workshop mode. So you'll see us non-violence trainers doing something very similar to sparkly fingers. We call it shaking it up. Can I see everybody shaking it up one time? So why do you think we shake it up in non-violence instead of clapping?
Amen.
Amen. So whenever the Spirit moves you, you can shake it up. You don't have to worry about clapping over us, right? What else? Why do you think we shake it up?
You're not hitting even
So
your own hands.
the Jain religion in India, they take nonviolence hardcore. They sweep in front of them. They cover their mouths. They don't want to kill any bugs. And they don't clap. They don't want to squish anything. Now, nonviolence is a path, right? It's not something you can be right away. So there's different people, different stages on that path. But we want to honor them by shaking it up. And thirdly, in sign language, this is how you clap. We just want to respect different cultures. So I see us all shake it up one time. All right, thank you. So my name is Nick Kakovich. I'm going to try to use my outside voice as much as possible. If you have any trouble hearing any of us, just please let us know. I'm a level 2 certified Kingian Non-Violence trainer. So that sounds cool, but what's that about, right? So Kingian Non-Violence, this training program, for an introduction to Kingian Non-Violence, we usually take 15 hours, 2 full days. It's some heavy stuff, right? So we're going to try to get through what we can in about an hour, hour and a half, okay? So it's a very brief introduction. But Kingian Non-Violence, the Kingian Non-Violence training curriculum was started by a gentleman named Bernard Lafayette. Bernard Lafayette was a co-founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee within the National Sit-ins, was a freedom rider in the South, and he was a very close associate of Martin Luther King. He was also, Martin Luther King put him in charge of the Poor People's Campaign, which is a campaign that was designed to be very similar to what we're doing here. Okay? Well, Martin Luther King didn't live to make it to see that campaign. And on the morning he died, the last thing he told Bernard Lafayette was the next movement was to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence. Bernard Lafayette took that to heart, went to Harvard, became a doctor of education, and created this training program. It's taught all around the world: Palestine, South Africa, Colombia, Brazil. Right now in Nigeria, they're training 20,000 former armed freedom fighters to become nonviolent warriors. So this is something that's real and taught all around the country. And we've been asked in the past to provide workshops for this Occupy movement, and we're more than happy to do so. Myself, I'm originally from Rhode Island. I've been in Arizona 2 years. Happy to be here, and happy and feel very blessed to offer some of this information that I'm very fortunate to know to everybody else. And Carly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Carly Uzecki. I'm an Arizona native. I'm a level 1 certified Kingian Non-Violence trainer, and I'm also an artist. And I'm very happy that you're all here to learn about this.
So my name is Ernesto. I was born and raised in Phoenix, and I'm a certified Kingian Non-Violence trainer as well.
So let's shake it up for everybody. It's great seeing that. So as I said, we're gonna try to fly through some information, give some time for us in groups to kind of process it. But like I said, we usually do an introduction in 15 hours, so please bear with us. Nonviolence is very deep. Nonviolence is a whole other way of looking at conflict and looking at the world. And one thing in our materials, you'll see us spell nonviolence one word. Instead of spelling nonviolence with a hyphen. Why do you think we don't use non-hyphen violence? So you don't separate the two terms, okay? What else? Right. So when we have this non, that means non.
It's not
She said it's not
anti-something.
anti-something, it's something in its own right.
Right, thank you for that clarification. So this hyphen becomes a minus sign, not being violent. The nonviolence we're talking about isn't simply not being violent, right? That's easy to do. That's being passive. The nonviolence we are talking about, what Dr. King and Gandhi talked about, is a force for change, right? And it's a tough word. It's a tough force to describe. In Buddhism, they say ahimsa, harmlessness, with courage and compassion. Gandhi, he tried to coin the phrase satyagraha. Satya means truth or love. Graha means force. So we're not talking about simply not being violent. That may be a part of it. We're talking about being a constructive force for change. Okay? And when we have non-hyphen violence, sometimes something is created called negative peace. So what's negative peace? Can you speak up?
Peace for all the wrong reasons.
So peace for the wrong reasons. What are some wrong reasons?
Or say peace to defend things like corporate greed.
All right.
That's why we're here.
Right.
Can you repeat? I couldn't hear you.
She said peace to defend things like corporate greed. So the wrong types of peace. Anyone else? What's negative peace?
Apathy, passivity.
Apathy, and what was the second word?
Passivity.
Acidity.
Or just
Oh,
passivity.
passivity. I'm sorry, man. So maintaining the status quo. If you walk down Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most segregated cities in the South in the 50s and 40s, things look peaceful, right? It's a nice city in the summer, all the greenery. So things have the appearance of being peaceful, but there's underlying tension and oppression behind that thin layer of peace. Right? Just like in America, things look pretty peaceful in Phoenix, right? Nice city, nice weather. But we know there's a lot of oppression and a lot of suffering right there, beneath that thin layer of peace. Do we have a comment?
All that needs to happen for evil to win is that good men do nothing.
So all that
Needs to happen for good.
For evil to
men
win is that good people do nothing.
right.
Good people do nothing.
Shake it up for that. So when we use non-hyphen violence, and we don't want to cause any trouble, we don't want to shake things up with this non-hyphen violence, we get that negative peace, right? When we use non-violence one word, we get something called positive peace. So what's positive peace about?
Standing up for each other.
So standing up for each other. What does positive peace look like?
Oh, I was going to say, like, positive peace to me would be peace, but for a purpose, like a positive purpose.
So peace for a purpose. So speaking out is about being wrong. So lack of systemic oppression. Two more comments. Unity. Sitting in front of City Hall. So positive peace. So I think a lot of what we heard is maybe some, actions to get that positive peace, which is very important. And that's using that non-violence one word, that force, sitting in front of City Hall, not being quiet, doing something. But when we create this positive peace, it means justice, equality, love for everyone. And the thing about non-violence, we're talking about everyone. We're talking about those CEOs who are suffering too in their hearts. We want to create positive peace for everyone in the world, where justice and compassion prevails for all, not just a select few, right?
Does that include the police?
I think it does include the police, right?
You're going to have to say that pretty loud for them here.
Right. Well, maybe we'll give a workshop over there. They seem pretty stationary, right?
Yeah, that might be a good thing.
There's John. One other quick thing about Dr. King. We usually call this King's Thought, this module, King's Thought. Dr. King was very eclectic. What does eclectic mean?
Getting things from all sorts of sources.
So from getting information from all sources, collect things, different types of knowledge. Dr. King knew that truth wasn't just in one place, right? Truth was embedded in all different cultures and all spiritualities. So Dr. King pulled from all these resources. So in nonviolence, we can't be narrow-minded. We got to open our minds for different possibilities and pull from different resources, right? And one of the things Dr. King used was something called the Hegelian approach, which Carly's going to break down for us.
Okay. The Hegelian approach is the approach that King used to find truth in two one, the thesis, and two, the antithesis. Yeah, right. Bring those. We take those and we analyze them, and from those two we synthesize to a third new concept that takes the truth from both. So an example of this. So, an example of this. If the thesis, the norm in our society, is violence, and the opposite of that is non-violence with a hyphen. So, what good is there in violence?
None.
Get things done.
So it's action oriented. It's active. It's a force.
Power.
What is bad about violence? What is bad about violence?
Destructive.
Destructive.
Futile.
Now, what's good about non-hyperviolence? What's good about being passive?
You don't have to do anything. You can be apathetic.
What positive comes?
Peaceful.
Yeah, so we don't do harm. What's bad about it is what?
Not opposing violence.
So if we take the good from violence, action, we refuse to be destructive. And if we take the good from nonviolence, which is not doing harm, but not being passive, then at the bottom, we reach nonviolence as one word, which is action.
Oh, bullshit, you have a point.
So a lot of times, people think that's weird. We're in a non-violence little workshop, and we're talking about pulling positive things from violence, right? So that's a pretty good example of thinking openly. And that's what Dr. King did. So if we try to limit ourselves to those thoughts, our two choices, that's not constructive, right? Is there any way we could use this Hegelian approach in some of the issues we're facing here as a community, or is there any questions?
Oh no, I was about to answer what you were asking. Go on.
So does everyone understand this model of analyzing the thesis, antithesis, synthesizing to get that third force? And then using passive and violence, getting the positives of each, we get that truth force?
I think it might be good to point out in the Hegelian model that there's a certain asymmetry as well, to where like some people think of like this kind of like dialectics, like
Yeah.
the opposing tension points. In Hegel's theory, it's the theory of the master and the slave, and so there is an asymmetry
Okay.
there as well, which is why I think Marx takes it up, and then other revolutionaries take up the method as well.
Right, so you're saying, Marx and other revolutionaries have used this model to analyze, two distinct,
Yeah, oppressors and oppressed.
to analyze oppressors and oppressed, and to analyze, dialectically, a situation.
Right. And the idea of antithesis means that whatever the thesis is, whatever is being presented to you, and the antithesis, or even from your own side, the thesis can be what you're saying. The antithesis is the idea that no matter what is being presented, whoever's fighting against it probably has some kind of point.
Right.
And that on either side, whoever, whatever you say, your opponents always have a point, or they wouldn't be your opponents. Doesn't mean that they're right, but it means that you always have to check and figure out between these two, how do we filter down to the truth?
They had
Shaking up for that. Yeah, so in nonviolence, we have to be mindful of what other people are thinking, right? If we're trying to win, in nonviolence, you have to win people's hearts over to the movement. It's not about defeating people, it's about winning people over. Dr. Lafayette said, the only way a revolution can be successful is if you have the sympathy or the active support of the majority. So we gotta be mindful of that, right? And if we better understand someone else's view, using this model, we'll be able to convey our message more effectively, right? Cool. So a couple other things about King's thoughts. We say King was holistic. It's kind of like eclectic. What do you think? Holistic. What's that about?
Taking a look at the entire system instead.
So looking at the entire system. I hear something else? Inclusive. Right. And those are two very good points. And yeah, Dr. King didn't just look at one conflict and say this is the reason that it is, right? He understood there's all these underlying conditions to conflicts and to situations and to oppression. And we can try to focus just on that one situation that rises to the surface, but that's not going to address the underlying conditions. And if we can change the underlying conditions in the system, we can create long-term change.
I apologize for getting here late. I was wandering around looking for you. But when you start talking about oppression, one of the things I read about just the other day, and it just knocked me for a loop, was the idea that the corporations, the politicians have a way of marginalizing a lot of people and excluding them from the process, because to survive, people have to do something that's quasi-legal, maybe black market, maybe drugs, maybe illegal parking, whatever it is. If you have some kind of a warrant or something like that, you lose the right to complain, and they like it that way.
It's an old script. It's called "Let's You and Him Fight."
Right, so in Nonviolence, we got to back tower ourselves, just like this movement's doing. So thank you for sharing that. One other thing before we move on. In the Greek language, there's three main types of love. For people that know Greek, I think there's actually 7, but there's 3 main ones.
Familiar?
Right?
Eros?
So, eros. So, eros. What's eros love?
It's
Romantic.
Kind of erotic, right? Eros, erotic. So do you think that's the type of love Dr. King prescribed to in nonviolence movements? We were joking, you know, we don't want to prescribe Eros love with Sheriff Arpaio, right? No, that's not what we're talking about. So the second type of love is philia.
Exactly.
Brotherly love.
So brotherly, everyone know Philadelphia? Philia, brotherly love. But brotherly love that's a conditional love, right? I'll only love you as long as you're good to me. You know, if we're in love relationships, I love you. If you break up with me, that's over, right? So that's a conditional, reciprocal type of love. And that's not what Dr. King prescribed. What he was talking about was agape love. So what's agape love?
God's.
Unconditional, deeper, spiritual, for all humanity. Now that may sound kind of soft, right? Unconditional love. But agape love takes the most courage of anything else. The nonviolence we're talking about is for courageous warriors, right? To love someone no matter what they do to you, to be strong enough that that people can't dictate how we feel about them, that takes a lot of courage. So that's the type of love Dr. King was talking about. Is there any questions about this section? Well, let's shake it up. Pass out some flyers. They have some information, but we're about to talk a little bit about the 6 principles of Kingian Non-Violence. And the principles are listed on here, so you can follow along if you want.
Alright, so there are 6 principles of Kingian Non-Violence. The first principle is non-violence is the way of life for courageous people. We need to understand that non-violence is not for the weak. We have to be brave, okay? And also understanding that nonviolence is just not simply a method, but it's something we have to use in our personal lives, okay? Now we're going to move on to the second principle to Kingian Non-Violence. Do you guys have any questions to the first principle? Any comments, concerns?
Ernesto, do you mind projecting a little bit more?
Okay.
Thank you.
And we kind of talked about, you know, this earlier, how it's it's for courageous people, and like Ernesto was saying, it's a way of life. So it's not a tactic only, it's a way of life.
All right, so the second principle of Kingian Non-Violence is the beloved community is the framework for the future. Dr. King did not want a black country. He wanted a country where white people and black people can come together as one people. getting believed in particular people having their own little what's it called, hood or something like that. He believed that we should work towards coming together in order to provide a better future for our next generation. Does anybody have a comment, a question?
And one thing you see, this is the framework for the future. So first of all, right here, I think we're trying to build this beloved community, right? So we're trying to build a more just, inclusive world, and this is the framework for the future. This is what we're trying to build towards the future. And this, we're trying to build something for the long term, right? Many of us may not live to see that. Dr. King's last speech, he said, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people shall overcome. So we're building for something long term. We're building for this great world, and every step we take is important. Okay, so we're going to look at another, talking about the beloved community and how to build the beloved community, we're going to talk about something called top-down, bottom-up. And just to update everyone on the kind of our agenda, we're going to go through the principles, and then we're going to break into groups and kind of talk about them and report back out. So hopefully not too much longer of us talking. All right. So top-down, bottom-up. A lot of times, so in society or in our families, there's people of authority and people that are on the bottom, people that are kind of the oppressed. So what would be examples of people in authority? Police. Mayors, politicians, corporations, CEOs.
Executives.
What's that?
Executives.
Executives. And who's at the bottom?
Homeless people.
The 99% maybe, right? So what happens a lot of times, which is understandable, the people at the bottom demonize the people at the top, right? And very understandably so, okay?
Nietzsche called it resentment.
What's that?
Nietzsche called it resentment.
Okay.
What? Yeah, it's
And likewise, people at the top look down at the people at the bottom and think they know best. This also happens in families, right? A young child, my parents, they're jerks, man. They don't let me go out. They're assholes, The parents say, I know best, do this. So this happens in life and in social conflict. But when we just demonize the top, it's very difficult to build that beloved community. Right? So in Kingian Non-Violence, as nonviolence organizers and leaders, what we need to do is bridge this divide. There's a communication gap, right? And even talking police and local politicians. I mean, corporations, CEOs, that may be harder to understand why we need to bring them in. But local politicians, I think we can all understand.
Have you heard of the snafu principle?
The what?
The snafu principle.
No.
True communication is only possible between equals, because inferiors are rewarded more consistently for giving their superiors a pleasant lie than for giving them the truth.
Right. And that's a wonderful point. And we're not going to cover the steps, but you have the steps on your paper. And when we talk about doing this process, it has to be among equals. And negotiation is the goal of nonviolence, but not negotiation for the hell of it. Negotiation on a fair playing field. And if it's not a fair playing field, that's when we do direct action to dramatize the issue. But anyway, so nonviolence leaders, we need to facilitate this process. Gather information from people at the bottom. What's the conditions? What's going on? And then bring it to those on the top in authority figures. A lot of times, these people are just ignorant. They're not arrogant. They may have an air of arrogance, but they're ignorant. They don't know. So we need to bring this information, and there may be bureaucratic reasons why they're acting like that, especially at the city level, right, or police level. There may be systematic reasons why they have to act like they do. So we need to get that information and bring it back here and continue this process of sharing information so we can understand the root cause of the situation and try to build this hopeful action. And towards this process, we can build the beloved community. Is there any questions about this? And I know we're moving very fast and just flying through it.
I think it's important, but if you want to get somebody to change their mind, the worst thing you can do is attack their beliefs. Because as soon as you attack their beliefs, they don't do anything except defend their errors. If you want to get them to change, you have to understand how they feel, let them know that others have felt the same way they have, and tell them that we found that it works best when you do it our way.
Let's shake it up for that. And that's a good point. In nonviolence, we want to give people a way out, right? Because I know myself, if someone comes real hard at me, I'm not really going to change my position because, you know, I'm stubborn. Like, no. But if there's a way out where I can save face, maybe more easier for me to bring about constructive change.
I think this is because maybe the reason why they're so ignorant of what they're feeling is probably because they're outnumbered and they're scared.
Okay.
So they use, you know, this air of, you know, like it's over dramatic, it's overdone. To show, I mean, if you think about it, 200 years ago, right? Most of the population were slaves. If slaves spoke up like we're doing all at once, let's say Shays' Rebellion actually worked, they'd be terrified. And I think we're still slaves. We're just all colors now.
Cool. And we had two more comments before we move on.
On the point of this, as an example, when I walked in to this gathering, the first thing I did is I stopped by the police and looked at them in the eye and thanked them genuinely for being here. Because, you know, they're here to do a job, and part of their job is protecting us. And as soon as I thanked them, they relaxed a little, they knocked down a little. As soon as you acknowledge the humanity of the person staring at you from the other side of that line, it's just pure human empathy. They are forced to acknowledge your humanity back.
Thank you. One more comment?
Sure.
Maybe you can speak up.
Of course. I feel like what we're describing works really well on an interpersonal level, but in terms of addressing the failures of institutions, and also the responsibility of people who have assumed positions of power, I don't think that there's a lot of accountability in the perspective that we're talking about right now. I don't think it's an accident that we have so much pollution and so much devastation of, the earth. I don't think it's an accident that some people are in the 1% and some people a lot more are in the 99%. And so I just wanted to say that.
So thank you for sharing that. And we're not saying this is for every situation, but when nonviolence, we're trying to offer tools to look at conflict differently. And sometimes looking at conflict differently in models like this can help us come up with creative answers. Okay? Now we're going to move on, keep going with the principles. So the third principle is attack forces of evil, not persons doing evil. So what does that mean? Find out why they're doing evil. And attack the forces, that's attacking the underlying condition. Those underlying conditions could be greed, it could be corporations, the way they're set up. Because what happens if we just attack people?
Makes it personal.
They defend themselves.
So they defend themselves, and hey, I was one of those people in DC marching when George Bush was in office. That, fuck George Bush, all that. So we got rid of George Bush. We did it. We have a new president. Did the conditions change?
No.
There's still war, poverty. So in Kingian Non-Violence, we want to try to get at those underlying systematic conditions to build a better world. Because people change all the time, but the system's not going to change.
I think one of those conditions that I think people try to attack that aren't specific is some people try to attack property, but there is a sense in which systems of authority get in front to protect property and put themselves, to where if you try to attack the system, it's hard to avoid the people that are part of their job is to protect that.
Right. So what I'm hearing is this would be difficult in different circumstances. We're using the word attack, right? So that's again just showing that this is an active force. We're attacking something, but the weapons we're using are a little, and the target is a bit different. So I see 1, 2 comments, and then we'll move on.
One other thing, if you attack something, if you attack what somebody did, they can change what they do. If you attack who someone is, they can't change who they are.
So we have another model for kind of explaining this principle. It's called aggression conciliation. So a lot of times we put our aggression towards persons, right? But what happens if we put our aggression towards persons and the conditions don't change, we kind of end up saying, well, things can't change. And we have acceptance and conciliation of the conditions, right? A lot of people feel that way, I think, in this country. A lot of, I know a lot of folks like that. They say, well, things can't change because now they're giving acceptance to the conditions. And a lot of times that's rooted because their aggression is at the people. So what we call for is aggression is not a bad thing, but we just need to put that aggression towards the conditions and offer conciliation towards the people. And people can change. They do this in Nigeria. People have killed hundreds of people. Killed hundreds of people, raped people, and they change their lives. So people can change, right? And that's one thing we want to think about nonviolence. You want to add anything? Any other questions about this? Sorry, we're just flying through this. Cool. So the next